It's good to see you again, Jerusha.
Hello, Iozinua Bunashimari, Daniel.
So I thought we'd continue with the book series and whatever adjacent topics. So we left it off with volumes 5 and 6, which is roughly halfway. I think you're writing your 11th or something. And yeah, mainly the topics will be soul transfer and fragmenting and cloning and types of technology, both fallen angel and angelic. So the fifth book starts with all these offshoots and shadow projects that were in the wake of Montauk and exchange programs with different countries. And do you recall the ones that happen around Canada, where there are mansions and castles and a long blue building, perhaps, to set the stage for the beginning of the.
Sure. I do apologize. In advance, I have a black eye, and no, I did not get grilled or anything. My laptop gave me a black eye. If you can,
That's what the Brill would say, though.
no. Well, last month my cell phone actually gave me a fat lip too. So I guess I have a special relationship with electronics. And you
Understood.
forget that you just heard that. Yeah. So okay. Well, going back just to recap, last time we talked and touched on programmable matter, nihilistic beings, spectrums of cryptozoology. One thing I will just say on that is that werewolf men had a very strange ability to disappear into the earth. So they would disappear and then they would leave this molting, like a silver patch, every time they did that. So you would know that they were just walking and then they would go inside of the earth somehow. They had the ability to teleport and go back and forth from the earth. So there was also a smaller type of a hybrid wolfman, dogman type of creature. They were shorter and they were actually mad about what had been done to them. So they showed some of the kids their records. They were pretty much more the lichen spectrum, and they weren't like the demonic top of the chain, full blown human eating type of werewolf. They were different. They had this inert, I guess they would have an inert shape shifting marker to their DNA. So, and the weirdest thing I did see in the cryptozoology was a chameleon man in the striped mine lands and also a siren. So just wanted to recap on that.
Sure.
And yeah, I have more stuff to say about Tateria too. But as far as the cloning centers go, Canada was a strange place because Vancouver was a spot where a lot of movies were made. And I lived in a lot of the towns of Supernatural. That series was mainly filmed a lot in Vancouver too. And then Toronto also had a base underneath it. So people would be taken there for various reasons. They'd make movies underneath in the bases, which were set up just like cities. And then they could release a movie a decade later. So it was very strange because the time doesn't really matter in some of these instances, because I know some of these were made 10, 20 years ago and stuff that's streaming out. Plus, we had the ability to use handheld tech that had bendable screens and send things into future dates, even like Google Photos and whatnot. And then we'd have data drop abilities to do that and then to pick up our own intellectual property vaults and data drops through that and recognize who's who and whatnot. So people are still picking up their data drops that did part of the time travel program. So I don't know what blue building you're referring to in Canada. Is there a specific one?
The one where Og said that he displaced his psyche and put it in drawers, and they used your guys' DNA to make him. Maybe I shouldn't even go there, but.
Oh, okay. That would probably, I can't really speak for him, but I would guess more Ontario region, like Blue Mountain region, Collingwood. There was Smuggler's Notch. There was Chateaus. There was a lot of things connected through New York and upstate Vermont and New Hampshire that went all through Canada back down into different parts of the U.S. So the Canadian and American assets, the base babies, CRISPR babies, they would be taken back and forth. So it would be confusing for them because sometimes they had different accents from where they originally came from, and that would happen a lot. But yeah, there's a lot to Canada. But as far as if you want to get into the cloning aspects, there's a difference in synthetic blood, which has been used for a long time now, and our real blood. So we actually learned how to differentiate between if you were in your real body or if you were tripped into another body. And that was because the life is in the blood, and spirit, soul, consciousness. We're an avatar apparatus and a tripart nature in ourselves. That's why some of us had the ability, even if we were locked outside of our body, like you just mentioned Og saying, to stream our consciousness and to collect it in other bodies, even not necessarily even human bodies. So you can't stay too long as a discarnate being outside of a body. So you'd have to eventually anchor into a body and drive the consciousness back down into it. But with the synthetic blood, we learn to hear our own blood and see it in our veins, and the color and the organic structures of blood, because even blood sometimes has time crystals in it and other things that we developed from where we came from, our origins, or over time, and what genetic markers were manifesting or accumulating. And some of us even had giant markers manifesting. So the synthetic blood was very different. It would almost look green in a clone body. So you'd be able to listen and put your ear down and actually hear it. Your own blood versus synthetic blood. So there's that. There's a synthetic blood versus real blood.
So that's how you knew you were in an organic versus a synthetic. But are we talking also clones or copies, meaning grown from a baby, or just, a replica?
Yeah, there's different variations. There are replicants, there are synthetic drones, and those are like consciousness carriers. The clones can live very long if they make a clone out of you. And then we actually had something called like a multiple use body. And sometimes Hollywood uses this as a database, and a body can be used by other people. We would take turns using a body sometimes. And another weird thing that they taught us was how to actually hijack a body. So say somebody is driving a car and you could have the ability, it's way beyond remote viewing, soul surfing, swapping out souls, doing all sorts of different variations of things. You could hop into that body before a car crash was happening and make that car crash happen, and then eject yourself out of that body and do things like that. So those were, I don't know, I guess advanced things that certain people did to cause chaos or to finish a certain mission or whatnot.
Wouldn't it be going against the free will, though?
Most definitely. Yeah, it's a trespass against somebody's life, even if they're weak-minded. The Traveler series has a lot of truth to it. Some things were used for good when people were going to die of a certain thing, and you could go into somebody's consciousness, and I've seen people's consciousnesses actually being overwritten and exchange and a transfer happen, or walk in situations like that. It can be used for good or bad. I've seen both sides of that. One of the kids actually became the overmind of Kansas City base. So he was driving most of the group of kids down there as a type of oversoul or overmind. That's the concept. That's kind of hard to explain. But the time buddies that were used, those had an expiration date, and those could be actually dissolved. But as far as the trespass goes, one example is we were taken out to Nevada, and it was I don't know the name of it, but it's the Last Supper, and it was in the middle of the night, and a Babylonian gate was opened, and we went through it, and the whole scenery changed in the desert. So all those statues that were out there, the fallen angels came down into the statues and inhabited the statues, and were actually looking straight down at us, and the dimensional perspective had even shifted too. So they, to us, looked very gigantic and huge because we actually saw them leave their stars and come down. And they wanted us to bow down to them, basically. And that would have been probably the last of us if we had done that. And then we would have been taken over and just used as one of these fallen angels in our body templates. But divine intervention happened at that point, and Yahushua's realm came down in his star and stood in front and didn't allow that possession to happen. We would have been basically given over to the tormentor, or reprobate mind, as you would call it at that point. So that was a very amazing night. Very terrifying, but also was amazing in a lot of aspects. So yeah, there's so much with the clones. I haven't been to a cloning center in 20 years. It's not a part of my life, and not to say people are weak or anything if they're currently being taken there or anything, but there's definitely ways to prevent that and to stop it. And I would say globally, with cloning centers, America's had about 83% shut down. I'd say 30% of people are fully souled, fully spirited humans right here now, and the waves of children that are coming in too. And, you know, that's a great work in itself that needs to still be done. So I'd say about 40% are actively trying to anchor their souls back down into singularity. The rest, I would say, would be destroyed as just the wicked and the kindling wood. China still does have the biggest cloning center, though. I'd say globally, 55% have been shut down. But as far as overriding it, how do you get out of a clone body? We saw this numerous times that they could not keep us in a body eventually. So then the way that they try to keep you running through clones and clone wars was to tell you that your original body had been destroyed or burned, which was usually a lie, or that they had destroyed your soul, which they can't. So there's ways to bypass it. And it starts with mental warfare. It's spiritual warfare. You bypass the brain gate and the certain switches, I would call them, and your neurons and neural lace and all those things that can get overlaid. And you override all those lock codes. And a lot of that work was shown to us by God Almighty and divine aspects of how to do that, and how they were keeping people in areas of captivity. So we learned how to get ourselves, not only ourselves, but other people out of areas of captivity, realms of captivities. And that's where the soul splintering comes in, the soul shards. You can even splinter a soul. You can splinter a core, and that's the most damaging. And you can drive consciousness to different areas too, so that all needs to gather back into a type of wholeness. So we learned this type of like spirit tech, I would call it. And first of all, you have to have spiritual armor on, and then you stop streamlining the Luciferian frameworks, because a lot of the stuff comes from computers, satanic networks, and computers that can have your bio DNA in it, and then it's running and tripping you into clones. DARPA's not the only organization that would do this. There's others. So you got to shut down the Luciferian frameworks, get off those Luciferian frequencies, and then just become more organic with your own frequency and blend in to other areas. So there's ways to burn out the signals, the access points, where those wires even, or the databases are coming from, and actually cauterize them. And for me, the whole concept of all of that was filtering things through the mind of Christ. Because for me, it's not just a Christ consciousness, it's a personage, and we were actively working with his realm. So we were going through him as the door, basically, to do that, and that realm, because we were anchored to it. Our spirits were anchored to it. There was a way to call back your spirit, like a Bluetooth connection, back into your body. If you're seated in heavenly places, you can do that. The soul is just a composition and a compilation of all your experiences and your emotions and all that. Like an animal, a dog would have a spirit, because they're all different personalities, but not really a soul. They don't get caught up in the stargates, like a Luciferian stargate or Christ stargate.
And neither do the regressive aliens. They just apparently have the spirit and the mind component, and they're looking to genetically modify themselves in order to have a connection, a bridge with the soul, but they're failing. But
Piggybacking, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, while they can destroy your core or essence, they can hurt it, like you said yourself, and splice it in million pieces or thousands of pieces, and put it in different places in time and space. And you've even seen a reptilian tearing pieces of a soul one time.
Oh yeah, that was pretty traumatizing, actually, to see that. And that would be a work that's complicated when somebody gets fragmented that much. But I've seen people completely being put back together. So when you have this different mindset and you can see it in a different mind's eye view and not from a place where you're trapped, and from looking at it from a higher standpoint, then you can work exponentially quicker. You have a higher light ratio. And your thinking isn't really imprisoned because you're coming from a place where you believe and know and stand that you've already been set free. Like 99% of survival, or 98%, I'd say, is mentality. So you have to have that type of mindset, and not a victim mindset or a defeatist mindset, even those scary situations. So that helped us get out of those situations. The multi-use clone bodies, they can be called sleeves or a skin, just like Altered Carbon shows you. And replicants are used more in political rings, I would say. And yeah, body doubles are used too, but sometimes they're even necessary. If somebody can't be in so many places all at once, or they're doing actually good work, I've seen that done. And we've even done it in the group that I was in, or used holographic copies of ourselves too, to throw off people. Or, there's different reasons. There can be a good operation that's done, and people would use a mask even for it. So it just depends on what the mission is or the operation. So I wouldn't just categorize all of that and the use of body doubles or hiding your original self as just being all bad, because I've seen both too. And another thing that I've seen too, which is really weird, is that you can take different clone bodies, and different cabals have different ways of operating. I've seen one clone hooked up to a breathing tube, and they only pull them out once in a while as needed. So then the clone will have a really raspy voice and just be used once in a while, or they'll be really shaky and frail and not be able to last very long. They would cough a lot. I've seen one pulled out of a bunker just for a certain public appearance, and then they're put back down in there. They're located at different areas of the country too. OA, in the OA they showed Prairie Surf, but her name was Prairie. But Prairie Surf in Oklahoma City was actually a big cloning facility / movie production studio too. So a lot of the kids, and I mean, this goes back to like 80s Kool-Aid commercial programming, breaking through walls, way back early 80s even. That underground was very strange. So a lot of movies were made there. There's a lot of different references in the OA to certain things, like Zacchaeus Breedlove Ewing was the detective, and the octopus scene actually did happen at a cloning center. And that was one of the strangest things that I've seen at a cloning center. They use the octopus symbol for a lot of reasons, and it goes back to very ancient times too. So that actually did happen on stage, and it was in like a theater place where there was probably hundreds of people seated in like a type of movie theater situation, and the octopus was on stage. So they would do cruel and unusual things to people. One of the worst things was just being tripped into a clone, and not just in a split of a second, not knowing it, you'd wake up in some weird body and have to perform something or do a rap song, something like that. So those were embarrassing moments when you're actually a slave in that type of system, and you'd have to work your way out of a scenario to get through it, or even sometimes fight your way out of situations or hallways or whatever scenario that they put you in there. So they use digital clones. So now research has been done with the W bands and other things to prove that that technology does exist. It did exist before, though. You can have a digital copy of yourself that's, I guess, projected out and overlaid in a body. So there's the digital cloning too. You can have an actual real physical twin, a triplet, or the digital cloning. There's different variations of different things.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they put alien-like rays, spirits in bodies. You've seen that in underground bases, in human bodies.
Yeah, that would be more demonic, I would say. I haven't really seen any good come out of that, unless it's from a more angelic realm, I guess. It didn't happen to me, but other kids have noted, and I've seen it done, that they have been put into a creature body or a werewolf body or somebody that has animal DNA and it's foreign to them, and then it becomes abominable and they get like flesh meshed or quantumly entangled with a type of creature. So that also redefines the whole area of hybrid warfare.
Yeah, but I meant the other way around. So they put grays inside of human children.
Yeah, some kids accepted that though, and they would allow that to happen to them. Sometimes they didn't really know what was going on subconsciously, and it was like a possession more so, I would say. Yeah, I've seen kids turn their heads and all you would see manifest is the gray face and the black eyes and whatever was driving that consciousness. But a lot of that was demonic because it would, almost 100% of the time try to hurt somebody. And the thing with those beings when they come into bodies is they were energy drainers. They were energy harvesters. So they would touch a child and drain their energy. And they use kids more like batteries, I would say, in those instances. But in the movie theaters or whatever panopticon areas, we'd call them, because there was sometimes multiple screens and multiple
like
viewing.
Arenas.
Yeah, we would do very strange things too, like be tripped into a body and then have to take a huge javelin, like in Roman times, and run and kill a creature in front of everybody, or multiple creatures sometimes, whatever the show was, I guess, for the night. So you can wake up to that situation and immediately have to war, perform something humiliating, or go to battle with something. I've been tripped into male and female bodies, never a creature body. The weirdest one was in a male body where they would send us out when we got topside and we started our surface lives and all that. I got tripped into a body, woke up in a car. It was like a black Mustang car or something, and I was documenting a road. I was documenting certain things. They made us do bizarre things like that. And I was in front of the Cuckoo Burger, which is in Miami, Oklahoma. And I was wearing these Meta glasses where you could read the information streams in the screens and the insides of the glasses and just talk, document, and do whatever. A lot of those memories, you don't have the full memory. They fade out probably when you're coming back and putting your original body, whether that's on Terra Earth Firma or up in the spaceship. So you just remember kind of blips of certain things like that. So you'd have to sometimes work your way back to your original body. And I remember doing a lot of that, and it was very draining. We did that for years until, we got different management, we got different contracting, and something changed along that process where we didn't have to be clone slaves anymore. We documented a hell of a lot in history, even 1800s, 1900s, a lot, turn of the century, a lot of that stuff. Clone Wars, where buildings before 9/11 would just come down in a few seconds, and original Clone Wars, I would call them.
But as far as the cloning center memories themselves, I guess for a while you chalked them up to nightmares because there wasn't any discussion, any forum about them.
Not in the 80s. The 80s kids, the group that I came from, there was barely anything out there. There was barely any research. I mean, none of us even grew up with computers. So when we go back to being switched out, normal lives, we had to really adjust to the amnesia and everything that was just completely polar opposite from the world that we had been born into and knew. Yeah, there was not much information. I had a court-appointed psychiatrist even by the age of 17 or 18. And when I started talking about certain things, was going to change my name, this certain psychiatrist actually printed off from his computer different papers. It was actually helping me remember certain places for some reason. But yeah, I didn't at that point, because I'm in my 40s now, I didn't even have a computer or a
There
cell
was no
phone.
language to explain it anyway, even if he documented it rigorously.
No, so when we would talk to somebody about it, we would sound so bizarre, and it was just way out far in the left field. I would say late 90s and into the 2000s, even the late, like 2010 was a point where a lot of it kicked off, where more people would accept it and more people were allowed to share their testimonies. And I would say thousands and thousands of testimonies were coming out, and connected experiences and instances where we could all safely share more things with each other. And some of us have regulated disclosure or soft disclosure of it. Now the door is getting more wide open to declassify a lot more and talk about a lot more things. So it was psychologically hard. Yeah, I would say.
Mhm.
One of the other weird things is that you could come back from a place and actually, the jumpers who had the ability to do this, they could get out of a maze even, or some crazy situation, and just go right back into their body. And if you had that ability, you just end up in your bedroom or something, and you would have a Herkheimer effect, and you would just start shaking violently for about an hour to offset everything that had just happened and quantumly disentangle from that. And the thing is that we were under such mind control, we would forget after the meltdown, like a like a sensory processing hysterical meltdown on steroids. We would forget what had even occurred. So it was even hard for us to document our own experiences. Plus, there was people in our lives, in my life personally, that were taking my stories consistently. If I did get a download, write something, say 50 pages of something, a CIA lady would come in and just take it and bring it to where she was, or she'd just burn it in the fireplace, things like that. So our history was constantly being erased.
Mm-hmm. And did you say that? Yeah, so let's maybe stick with cloning facilities for a while, since it's one of the more approachable topics. And so sometimes you would feel like the alter had kind of a mind of its own, and you're just a passenger or spectator. You're only at partial input, like they already had a pre-programmed personality.
Yeah, because we had a lot of active alters running at the time. And if you were diamond programmed, you would have at least 100. So if you were in the hybridization program, that would be one of the alters in the middle. Age 15 was a pretty big age for me with the hybridization program. So you'd have also phantom pregnancies and disappearing babies. So that was pretty disassociative at that time. But a lot of those alters got integrated, and a lot of them got healed, brought to the light. Some of them just need to speak, or a consciousness part needs to surface and be released. And there's different types of ways to integrate into all that. So yeah, we had the ability to jump. We even jumped from being in cages in Plum Island to out of those bodies as children. So we had that ability, and we could go through mirrors sometimes, jump through mirrors and disappear and find our way back to our original selves. So some of us ended up being hunted for certain reasons like that. And then there was also an ability that people had to slide. So I nicknamed that sliders. And what you would do is, if you were in some really gnarly situation where, like there was a gnarly situation, I was in an old world mansion. We could port in and out of some of those. And there was 2 cloned cops that were torturing clone bodies in this particular mansion. So it was like a nightmare mansion, and that would resurface as probably a nightmare later on in your life until you cleared that or released it. So they were actually slitting clones' throats in a bathtub and doing things like that. So if your soul or your spirit was in there, one of my friends she would actually go behind the door while her body was being tortured and watch. So she would disconnect with her body and be able to process it whenever. Now, processing things like that can be years down the road. It doesn't happen automatically, like once you reconnect to your body. So the way that we process things is also bizarre because sometimes we work backwards and not everything has a consistent timeline whatsoever. So with the slider ability, what you could do, and I taught a lot of kids to do this, is if you were tripped into a clone body, then you could actually either run very fast and gain a certain momentum and inertia, like we learn as the flash type abilities and speedsters and whatnot. And for me in this particular house, what I did is there was huge wooden banisters. So I'd run really fast and kind of activate that inertia within me to jump and then hit the wood on the banister really hard and jump out of my body. Sometimes we needed a physical push to actually jump and propel ourselves out of a body. Other times it became easier. Depends on how traumatic, I guess, the experience was. But we had already had prior instances of being time tortured, and Aquino and others were actually taking clones in the barn house in Montauk and tying ropes around their necks and also strangling them. So we had seen that a long time before other ops and other houses and instances that we were in. Somewhat of a self-taught thing, but it does come from on high as well, because a lot of this we were taught. And then I guess it became muscle memory, but spiritual muscle memory.
And do they need your consciousness to be anchored somewhere in order to animate multiple bodies at once? Because you said that you can have like digital clones. Or what happens? How can they split your consciousness? How does that work?
Yeah, consciousness is the driving factor. It would be the emotive force, I would call it. If you did the four squaring could be split into 4 different bodies, then yeah, your consciousness could go very far.
But not as strong as if it were just whole, right? So it's always lesser, maybe like a lucid dream state when you're in these cloning centers, or maybe I'm just assuming.
It is kind of like lucid dreaming. But sometimes it was even more real than that. Depends on like what percentage of you is in there. It could be, a small percentage where you could still be partially in your body and yet going out and reporting to your cult loyal parts or whatnot and participating in certain activities and then coming back. Or it could be all of you, which was way harder to come back from. They started us out in the barn house in Montauk, the Resident Evil house, I called it, in these tubes that you would lay down in. And they look like hyperbaric oxygen chambers. So then they would decrease your body to a rate where your heart would barely beat. And they taught us that we had to pop up out of our bodies because we thought that our bodies were going to die. And so then we'd have to run through different scenarios and different light spectrums. And they did research of what we were doing in different light spectrums and frequencies in ultraviolet.
And speaking of that, would these cloning memories also run the gamut in terms of sometimes happen in the same timeline as your waking life, but sometimes maybe in these pocket realities?
They bled into each other eventually because unless you're a complete slave, you're going to blend in with, I guess you'd say, the rest of you. Even if you jumped to 2037 and you haven't run into that part of yourself, along the whole spectrum, you're going to eventually, run into yourself and recognize and collect pieces and parts of you.
So you're saying even if you wake up in phantom places, that it's still used, still your consciousness being subjected to that, so it's still worth taken seriously.
Yeah, because it's like a radio dial on a radio, and you could have a low frequency on it, or you could have a really high frequency on it. If you go full bright in a different body, or if you would be dim. That's the best way that I guess I can describe it. But since the pods that we were trained with and extreme physical training back in Montauk to express and to hyper accent these abilities that helped us to actually get out of other pods. There's pods in space. There's pods on spaceships. There is cryostasis pods, things like that. So when they increased their games, I guess you would call it, because some of it wasn't really good training. I would say some of it were just games that they were playing unnecessarily. Then we would have to increase our spiritual ratio to, to not get devoured, to not get lost in time, to not get eaten up.
So it is like Marshall says, they do a lot of things just for their own entertainment, including scenarios, SSP scenarios.
If you're dealing with reprobate minds, yeah. That would go under cloak and dagger and under the radar. I've seen centers like that, but a lot of places have been shut down. A lot of places have been flushed out, burned, and they've been filled in with different materials and shut down. So thank God for that.
But what about, I mean, since they're still ongoing, at least to a certain degree, what about who is cataloged and what do they need from you to force your consciousness in one of those clones? Or is anyone a target?
Well, anyone can be in that, I guess, industry, you'd call it. But it does come down to your consent. And are you going to participate? And is it implied consent? And is it something that you can deal with and take care of and clean up, I guess, in your morphogenetic field and in your freedom of free will, your choices that you make? Absolutely. You can shut it down. And nothing is impossible. I don't think along those terms. Like I'm always going to be this or that or a targeted individual, because I've seen more times than not that things like that can be shut down easier than what people realize. Like a horse is tied with a rope to a chair, but that horse would think that it can't get free. So you have to change your thinking, for one, and really love yourself enough to be able to let a lot of those patterns that you've developed go and confront them. It's some people get addicted to the strife, where they think that's just a way of life, that they can never leave, or that part of themselves can never escape or get free. But that in itself is a lie. So you have to identify the lies, get those lies out of your life and out of your system, because we all are a working system, and whatever we run in our own internal programming and system, that's going to manifest. So you don't want to reinforce other people's lies, because then you're more susceptible to the evil programmer's vindictiveness and keeping that cycle of abuse going, because it's really a cycle of abuse when you look at it.
Yeah, but at the same time, you admit yourself that they even use technology to amplify your insecurities and map your mind. So they give you the most nightmarish scenario. So it's a year-long process to.
It could, but you don't give all your power to the kingdom of darkness. I'm not controlled by the kingdom of darkness. My dreams are not controlled. My choices are not controlled by the kingdom of darkness. So you have to take everything that you do and every thought and hold it captive and filter it correctly and through the right focus lens. Because if you live like that in fear and you think there's nothing that you could do and you're just accessible, then you're only reinforcing that in yourself. So even simple visualizations can help shut certain systems down, and going in your inner worlds, mapping out what's actually been done to you, what's been put into you, identifying things, and then you form a different identity when you start doing those things.
So maybe to illustrate the fact that you can get away rather than just advice with, which, is great, but I'm sure that it would be more practical to go over some of your experiences, if you don't mind, like the time that you were mind linked with the octopus entity, which I think you said it's an ancient satanic, like maybe Atlantean creature.
Yes, I did. My mind's going on so many tangents. Yeah, well, first, before that, your consciousness fragments can all be collected back. And I've seen that. And I just want to drive that home. Your trafficked essence, even from pre-Adamic times, before your inception on Earth, that can also be taken back from any region of captivity. So it's my goal and my hope that anybody that was used in the cloning centers for nefarious purposes or whatnot would come back to baseline normal. And that includes healing the mind and I guess normal type of thinking, whatever that is for each one of us. And one other thing I'll say about the clones is that there were groups of kids that were very blue-eyed children, and that was one thing in certain groups that we remembered about each other. And the clones always had green or brown eyes. So that was another identifier to, oh, maybe this isn't, one of our friends. We always wanted to stay away from the black-eyed bodies. If you knew somebody and then they showed up as black eyes, we call them scarecrows. And they were like hollowed out people. They were information suppressors, energy harvesters, and that was used in a hollow type of program, mimic program. The only exception with the green and the brown eyes, if you were born originally with blue eyes, was there was an instance in the Montauk Manor, the basement, where a bunch of kids were brought downstairs in gray, oversized, long T-shirts. That's all they were wearing. And there was a group of Nazi men down there. This was the Red Skull era. And they really hated green eyes for some reason. So they would lay kids out on a table and they could change your eye color. So some of the kids actually survived with a type of mad science like that could change your eye color. And I know a couple that, the baby pictures show them with blue eyes and now they have completely different colored eyes. So that's the only exception.
Yours are kind of in between too.
But no, I have gray eyes. I've always had gray eyes. Okay, the octopus you want to go into. Well, that is a very long story. And that goes back into antediluvian times, Atlantia, Lemuria, Pangaea, way, way, way back when. So the times when the 10 rings were formed in cities and the Nagas would come up and communicate with people, and they were 20, 30 feet tall or more. That was a time when the bases were actually built on the holes that the Nagas had lived in, and they had to actually be sealed into the earth with an ancient tongue and language. So a lot of those domes were built on those holes with the serpentine races and the serpent beings, and a closing out and a sealing of their serpent tongue. So with the octopus, that goes back to Tartaria too. This was a time where pre-Adamic structures were here. America at that time was very scary. That's why only 1/8 of America is mapped out on the very old maps. It just looks like a little squiggle because people were so afraid of the New World and the worst cannibals that were here. Plus, they would go on expeditions and voyages and they would disappear and not return. So that ended up getting mapped out very late in time after many races and things were dealt with. It looked like
So it was dominated by aliens or what?
Cannibalistic giants for the most part, and other beings. Yeah, they were here, but there would be giant heads laying out on the landscape and different things from different wars, and it just was a very disorienting and scary looking place. It wasn't just Native Americans had some little teepees around the land. It was pretty intense, and there was active temples, active human sacrifices, people actively ripping out people's hearts and whatnot. But the giants were the worst in the world, and so that's why another part of that whole thing got covered up. So at that pre-Adamic time period, there was the Marine Kingdom, and the Marine Kingdom had a lot going on with it, and Marine Kingdom kings, and a lot of beings were imprisoned, I would say, down there. So as a revenge and as a type of rage, after the antediluvian period, the flood, all of that, those beings from the Marine Kingdom, which were the worst ones, actually tried to invert our reality on surface lands and get into man's mind again, because man was given dominion over all the kingdoms. And that still stands. That's why a lot of these beings had to die off and go back and get out of the way, because we're supposed to fulfill that chain of command. And we are actually the dominant species, not aliens, because we have DNA that nobody else in the universe has. So the octopus beings, you see those dome buildings they mirrored a lot of things on the surface to what it looks like down in the marine kingdom, where an octopus house would be, and domes and 8 openings for legs and other things. It was like something out of a sci-fi movie. So them trying to come back into land and dominate the kingdom again, using humans, they used a type of mind virus to invert reality. So they would bring the whole marine kingdom back up onto the land, and we would manifest the whole marine kingdom and all the hybridization and start that whole chain of events and that whole thing again. So they wanted it to become their habitation, basically. And
so not just park your consciousness inside humans or possession, but actually full time incarnating themselves in humans.
Exactly. Coming through kings or queens or whoever was leaders. That's why leadership is always attacked, because principalities target leadership. And they can come from the marine kingdom, they can come from stars, they can come from different realms. So they become a mind virus to whoever they're operating through. And then that operating principality will defile a land area and the land itself, or a city or a region or whatnot. And then they'll gather more, and then it becomes a problem like Legion that you have to deal with. So that's what happened again. And these repeats of old evil gods masquerading with different masks, different faces, and creating all these structures and commerce systems and other things on Earth that were never originally here. So the symbol of the octopus itself, with their big brains, that got involved into a lot of different types of programming, Hydra, mind control programs. So it does go very far back. That was actually a sad time period too, because after that, in the pre-Adamic time period, I actually saw the last Polarian from Hyperborea die off, and I knew that that seed wasn't going to dominate the Earth again, because there actually was a time when giants had a bigger status than humans did, and so we had to go back on top of that chain and take that over. And it took a very long time to do that, because all those buildings are made for giant doors and other things, not just humans that were here, so that man could take back that dominion and do what man is supposed to do. But we fail effortlessly time and time again. So that was an order from heaven and the sovereign Lord. So the Mayan temples that were here in America, they were underground networks. They would take people from the underground, bring them up into their temple system. A lot of people hid in that time period of Tartaria so that they wouldn't be held captive or put in the asylums or everything else that was being instilled for the new reset. And that time period also did involve the Astracans, the Circassians, and the Dagestans too, and other areas. But America was a central hub of a lot of it, and what really needs to be uncovered still, because of so much was buried and hidden in history here. So it's going to keep coming out. Michigan was a big hub of the mothers, and a lot of mothers of the orphan trains that were sacrificed there. And they were processed through one building that had a huge black face on it with teeth. And people that went into that building were basically never seen again. Okay, so I lost my train of thought.
Well, we were talking about the giants, which apparently positive and negative, but you said that America was the reason why only a Native of America was charted was because it was so laden with, negative giants. But how did they come to get wiped out?
Well, there was different types of giants. Later on, what we saw was some of the people in the cabal and some of the elites did weird things because of their giant obsession. And also Jesse James, because they're obsessed with King James, was a clone, and other weird things in history. But they would marry giants that were left. And a lot of these giants were cognitively disabled. I'll just come out and say it. And, they would marry like a brother and a sister giant together and have these bizarre ceremonies. They put them in red robes and put like plush hats on them and crowns and whatnot. So we saw some giant marriages, and they tried to make that normal and acceptable. But the thing is, with the giants that were left over that we saw and ROPs that caused a problem and a schism is because they still had cannibalistic desires. So that's why they couldn't continue to be integrated into society, because it was never bred out of them, and it was never completely dealt with. So there would be a grocery store, for instance, that would have a giant statue in front of it, and it would be called Giants. So even back in like 1940, they would have a covert cannibal club, and that was ran by a certain people or certain one of the giant hybrids that was left over. And it could be in the basement as a restaurant, or the cannibal club thing in itself isn't a new thing. It's not like a 2000s thing. That has been going on covertly with certain groups for a while. So a lot of places had to be shut down because of that factor. And okay, the main thing that you're getting at is that the giants in America, how they were dealt with was, some of that history was put into the Book of Mormon as the Lamanites, Nephites, that whole story. Their skin was necrotic, and much like other creatures or mermaids or druids, they did have necrotic skin, and they wouldn't stop eating people. And that's documented in a lot of different places. So a lot of those wars ended at the Great Lakes and the 5 war basins and those regions. It involves scalar weaponry and technology that, given in people or tribes' hands like that, if they would have continued to use it, they would have destroyed this continent. So we saw the fallout of that, I guess, the tail end of what they had been doing here and their treachery. So America could get actually a new face because of its blighted history. It was like a big blemish, and it had to be rewritten. But the land itself was so defiled that it would take hundreds of years of decompression to make it baseline normal and to elevate its frequency and to become a cultivated good place. So some of them were cursed, I would say, and part of that curse was to never breed again, to never be able to inhabit this place. Like scriptures tell you that their name was blotted out. There's instances where that happens and they're not allowed to operate anymore.
Mm-hmm. But the marine creatures can't maintain their appearance, so they have to embody human looking at the surface. But in this case, in the cloning center, they still were upright and on dry land, or were they? Was an octopus humanoid, or?
They had physical form, especially in the ocean. Of course, they have physical form, just like dolphins and other beings do down there. But as far as surviving on land, no, an octopus can't survive in our oxygenated environment.
So they weren't a human with an octopus head, because that's sometimes depicted in certain movies and games. Or
Definitely,
they were?
you would see the entity, the spirit of the entity, the mind of the entity, all of that entity besides its physical body that lived underground. Its mind would operate on land through a leader or a person to change it into what it wanted. So that's why the octopus spirit is still involved with mind control, and it is still a spirit. I've seen it actually come out of people and out of their spines. So it doesn't have to look like a huge octopus, but I've seen it manifest in people's faces and the way that they behave and act. And it tries to shut down and suffocate in a very strange way everything that is going to promulgate a goodness. So it operates on a multi-level and a multi-dimensional level. I guess I could explain it as that. But a lot of beings have different characteristics to them. Another being like fallen angels that could take over a human body or a super soldier's body, make them think that they're a god, a goddess, and that's where they came from, and that's all they are, and they're all mighty and powerful. I have seen actual fallen angels. You know, there's Nephilim, there's fallen angels, there's giants, there's children of giants, and down the chain, different ways to categorize them. But the fallen angel ones, which are very huge and very tall, I've seen those actually get sealed into the earth. And that goes back to the cube by a type of holy angelic tesseract type cube that will box them in like a spiritual coffin and put them down into the earth. So that's a very ancient practice that could be done with very malevolent beings, to actually chain them inside of the earth, to box them inside of the earth. And now that was done all the way back to antediluvian times and even pre-Adamic times, just like the giant serpents.
And in addition to what you said, they also sometimes possess you, and then because of their previous lifetimes of people they have possessed, give you the false impression, delusion that you were this person in your past life, whereas you're just sharing memory with a fallen angel.
Yeah, you could be partially operating and just have a walk-in experience with them. A lot of super soldiers were used in that aspect to drink adrenochrome before certain missions, or even to go down into a sea base. And those were usually led by satanic people in the military. And then they would get worked up into a frenzy, and they wouldn't remember anything because obviously their whole body was possessed. And then they would go out and do whatever they did in their mission, but they would have very supernatural strong abilities, because they could be like the strength of 10 men if they got them to that point. I actually woke up during one of those instances and was in my normal state of mind and saw the frenzy circle that was around me, and was the only one that wasn't possessed, but I had to pretend that I was, and just be blank and steel cold eyes and go into that mode to be able to not have anybody pick up on that, or, because it's like a security measure. If you're not completely under, they'll know, and they'll make sure that you are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if I should go into that, or maybe return to the octopus. So what was it like to mind link with it? And I think you even said that it used chemicals to further its control over the clones.
Yeah, maybe they could use different chemicals. It was a gross feeling, I guess, because a lot of those beings, they also have blue blood, and their blood is like ink, like a squid has like blue ink blood. So if you were interfacing with that, or if it was in you, it would make you feel really sick. And there is a sickness that can come with marine water and flushing that out of your system if you interface with it, or if it's been in you, with living water that comes from heaven, which is an actual physical thing. And I guess what it was like was, it was a very strong mental link, and it would feel very magnetic. So you would have to buffer that from your mind and create a wall, a barrier, so that it wouldn't be looking out and using you to look out and operate through.
Did it have a voice?
Oh yeah. The only voices I remember, they were all male. And there was one where it actually followed us to different places when we were linked with it. And we had to sever off that connection and link. One was the Xubuntu houses, or Xanadu houses, not Xubuntu. Xana, Xanadu, starts with an X. But there was a time period where they had Xanadu houses, and they were built in a dome, and they would take a lot of kids at these houses for some reason. And I remember being connected to an octopus spirit at this one house, and I was there for a couple days. But I eventually shut it out, and whatever it wanted to do with me or operate through me as, it didn't stay, it didn't work. But it would be a creepy voice, and it would be they have a devious nature. I guess that's the only way I could describe it. And
manipulative.
Very manipulative and lulling, where it would, just the way that they talk is almost like a snake would try to hypnotize you. That's how the octopus spirit comes to you too. And it gets you to think in its terms and to see things in its terms. But you would recognize its voice and be able to shut it out, because it wasn't V2K. It was actually spiritual warfare. And they were powerful for a while, but it was just a period of time where we would be introduced to different hierarchies and different entities, and be able to defeat them, to combat them, and to have victory over them. So that's the way I see it now. Some people can carry these things their whole life and never get delivered from them. So you have to identify what you've interfaced with and then deal with it. The
I
octopus
think
is one.
mhm. You even talked directly to God at one time, and then you stopped fearing it.
Yeah, some of us and some of the kids they took to Montauk were prophets, were prophetesses. They had different anointings, different things that they came to Earth for to do, and so they knew that, and so they captured a lot of God's children and put them out there. So if you had a connection to the All Father and you could hear and audibly hear His voice, then that was definitely an advantage. It was a saving grace to a lot of kids because they were the most powerful that could do that and keep that link and not have that link severed, because that's the link that they wanted to break the most, because they can't really do much with your link that comes from that higher source, and they can't see what you're doing, they can't know what you're doing, they can't hear what you speak when your spirit's speaking in different languages or speaking in tongues. They only know what they have on their agenda to program you with. So those kids became an anomaly to them for sure. So in my life, what helped me is I just followed military intelligence, and I followed the word of God because I believe the word was made flesh. It's active and alive, sharper than any sword to sever spirit and soul. And that creation itself is even completing through it. And the word is permutations of the living God spirit.
Let's make a slight digression to since you mentioned that you were a prophetess, which is sometimes referred to as an oracle, I believe. In the same book, Volume 6, you make some interesting predictions based on, your own lived experience about, well, the apocalypse. And one of them is that the anti-Messiah is going to be worshipped in stadiums with screens, and maybe even is a clone of the real Christ, if I got that right.
Yes, kids that had those abilities that came from the kingdom of light to be if you were a seer or an oracle of God, first they try to sever that ability, they try to snuff it out, and they try to make you their seer oracle, their psychic for their purposes, which wasn't really your destiny or your fate or your mandate to come here and do. So you would get derailed from your destiny. You would have these alternate false futures spoken over you. A lot of them was the Weaver witches that weaved in out of time and stole kids sideways out of time and did all sorts of ways to trip up kids with those abilities. Yeah, you had to keep that link and follow that as a follow through to stay alive. You had to hide it from them, I would say, sometimes because they would use it against you. A lot of us hid parts of ourselves, even to each other, or even in situations we'd have to pretend we didn't even know each other if we cared about one another, because if they saw that you cared about a certain person, then they would also use that against you. So we had to play into a lot of scenarios and hide our cores and our true selves that could eventually be remembered or come out later. So one thing I always did is that even everything everybody else was doing, I always did something different. I don't know if I'll always be that way, but that's one way that I kind of sidetracked a lot of things. But as far as prophecies, yes, I had those abilities. And as a child, I did hear the audible voice of God, and He would tell me to do things to save my life, what was going to happen, what a demon was speaking in somebody. And then I would know in advance as a forewarning what was going to play out. So then I'd be given some time to be able to deal with that instead of last minute and, oh, this person's going to try to kill you, because a lot of people have tried to kill me. So then my life was saved a lot by that connection. As far as the prophecies and other things like that, some of those are time locked, and some we would write and we would put in a book or a journal, and we would have to hide them because that's also knowledge that we were time hunted for and what was sought for, because they were always trying to prognosticate certain events to harness whatever kids saw in the godly realms and in the heavenly realms to make it into their alternate timeline, I guess you could say. So we had to hide some of the books, some of the prophecies, and we'd hide them in buildings or churches right alongside with Tesla tech and other things. For a very long time before the reset, there was patents, there was different technologies and things that were hid in very precarious places, I would say. It wasn't always in like some black vault or bunker underground. Sometimes it was just in a very weird place out in the open. And 50 years later, somebody could come back and pick up that object or pick up that book or pick up that information, pick up that knowledge, and that would be useful in the time program that I was in. I think there are different time programs too. So yeah, we did that. And then we used pseudonames and pen names in a lot of instances. The House of Leaves was one of them, the whale's toe letters about France and names that are in there. A lot of things we had to write in third person, just like journals or diaries. And that was a safe way to be able to transmit information, data that would get lost in time, and then be able to access that later. So things did get lost in translation, I would say, because of the things that we wrote or whatnot or documented. Not everything was perfectly cataloged in a supercomputer on a spaceship or anything. Like things did get messed with and things did get erased and things didn't always go as planned. So we had to have different mechanisms and ways to not just put all your eggs in one basket and to be able to successfully finish the circuit and finish the program or project, whatever you were working on mission, because it would tie into other missions too.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, but so do you consider that this is sensitive to discuss? Because you did gloss over the predictions around, the impending end of...
the Antichrist?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, there more scriptures allude to an Egyptian type of Antichrist, and it ties back into a lot of scriptures about trees, which trees represent government. And we had a lot of trees programmed into our system, and black Kabbalah trees that we had to pull out of our system, and those cliff oaths especially. But as far as the Antichrist goes, I do think that it will come from the Middle East, but be more Egyptian, more from Turkey or that region. So for now, that's what I land on. I didn't write a prophecy ever about the Antichrist. It was different ones, more for nations, more for region.
You did have one about the 10 Dragon Kings.
Yeah, that was actually something that I saw when I was a little kid. I was taken to the Rockefeller Square Center, which was a compound. I don't know if I told you this or not, but I had a file there, and I was going there for certain reasons, and we had broken out of the compound that was underground there. And in a moment, I was standing there, and my pupils started shaking very fast. And I would go into the whirlwind, you call it, scriptures call it. It's a Holy Spirit type of whirlwind that's a cool breeze, and it lifts you up. Sometimes that would happen before battle. And it would fill your whole system like a Holy Spirit blood transfusion. And what I saw in that moment, there would be like a field around me, and the handler I was with would just stay away because he wasn't allowed to touch me when that happened. You have like a shield around you or a force field. And I looked on the top of the buildings there, and I saw 10 Dragon Kings that were all circling in the air in the clouds. And they represented, different realms, different regions, different nations. And it was very far off into the future, of course. And they looked like they were going to destroy everything. And they were ripping each other apart and just continually fighting in this like perpetual type of war that didn't seem to have an end. And it was also kind of a foreshadowing of the war in heaven that came to earth and how it had carried out here. So in this vision, caught up in the spirit, as you would call it, in this vision, and Yahushua came down as like a radioactive giant looking figure.
But I think you're skipping the part where they were fighting over a ring of power.
Yes, they definitely were. That ring was there. That ring's been there for a very long time. The rings of power, they can have different layered meanings, just like scriptures have layered meanings. But the ring of power was probably more for Earth and keeping Earth in like a prison captivity type zone. So they ended up getting served though. And I was looking at their fighting, and then Jerusha came down with a sword that came out of his mouth and just cut them all into pieces, but they shrunk into little tiny worms. So the most terrifying creatures that I could see that controlled certain systems or dominions that dominated the scene, they were just little tiny worms at the end, and they weren't that big. So they were just dead on top of like a water type of substance. And then the scene wrapped up, and then I came back to normal in my body. And so things like that would happen. Yes, I would definitely have to record and release them, because when you release a testimony, when you release something like that that's coming from a divine counterpart or aspect, then the trading floors change, and the trading floors change into bringing blessings into your life, into others' lives, and even healing. If you get healed from something, and you have the ability to heal other people of whatever you got healed from, so it's your cup flows to where it's overflowing, and it's supposed to work that way.
Yeah, I think it's relevant to, especially because it has some historical backing. Apparently, even in Atlantis, they had 10 kings, and some Asian chronicles. But at a later date, the other significant.
They also came from the ocean too,
Mhm.
because there's things down there that are going to surface and come up.
And just to close with the apocalypse, you did have a vision of what it would look like in the 3 days of darkness, and it was similar to the Bible, really ominous, and people losing their minds and turning on each other and getting swallowed up by the earth, right?
Yeah, it would be similar to Old Testament times, where the avenging angel or something terrifying that could just come down and wipe out 145,000 people, or open up a sinkhole in the earth and take care of, hundreds of thousands of wicked people, which will happen again in Jerusalem. And there's fault lines and geographical ways that you can even look at that to prove it. Those types of high judgments, I would call them, those would come down when necessary, but those are also at a time when it has to be, because there's like balances and weights in heaven, where the prayers go up, the incense rises, but the bowls get full, and then they pour out onto a city or a nation. It is like incense, which is our spiritual nature and our free will that fills those types of spiritual and physical objects up until they come down into the earthly template and merge. But the apocalyptic time period would be like the time when the curses were on Egypt and the firstborns were slain and everybody was terrified and everybody saw that blackness. It would be like that, because it's a final judgment, it's unstoppable, and it's for a set time. And if you're not strong and you're not in that kingdom where you're a living temple and doing what you're supposed to do and empowered by God's Spirit, then you're going to be susceptible to lose your mind much faster. Those judgments they're supernatural judgments, just like when the river turned blood red, because all the babies were killed in that river, and that was the abominable sin, because all the babies that were thrown into that river offended God. So those types of judgments are supernatural, because there is a spiritual barrier that happens with them where things won't touch you, but they'll affect others. And that's going to be the way it is until the end of time. So the Egyptians would go and they would take a cup and they would try to drink the water, and it would be a cup of blood. But somebody that was in covenant and sealed in God's kingdom would go and they would take that water and it would be just water. So there's these weird barriers that happen with spiritual warfare and the separating of souls and all of that.
And I'm guessing the sky was red and full of smoke, and
It was.
probably, yeah.
It has to go back to the way it was, because in the times of Tartaria, the sky was even different, and the sky had dimensions to it. The colors were brighter, just like they are in heaven. There's more dimensions and layers to things that were seen, and everything was closer. The stars in the sky looked like lamps, and they hung differently, and the lighting was very different. So some people could see the firmament when they looked up in the sky. And then when all of the scalar weapons and the warfare just continued and continued, the whole atmosphere changed. So it was like atmospheric discharge that affected the energy of everything, including us and the Earth's morphogenetic field, even that connects with our heart and our heart stargate. So things looked very different then, and things were closer. You know, the stars looked like they were extremely closer, or the moon, the celestial objects. So that's the whole point, is to get back to reflect that light source back then. Because, you know, I believe that God is a God of perfect order, just order. I don't believe everything's relative, and there has to be a bar and a standard of righteousness. Otherwise, everything would just fall into entropy and chaos and decay. And that standard has been set.
Right. And since we're on the topic of celestial bodies, did the sky sometimes stay fixed, like static? For example, some of the Montauk children say that the sky didn't move because they were in a time bubble. Was that the case for you, or did you notice anything of the sort in any other occasion?
I have seen that static delay, and it really throws you for a loop, because processing that through a child's mind is was unfathomable sometimes to see things like that. And our higher selves, our elder selves, I guess, later on in life would teach us what things meant and certain things like that. But yeah, the static does definitely happen. And one of the weirdest instances I guess I can share about that was I had a 17-hour night once. And I was in a parking lot, and we were on a time mission. It was the 1960s. And this parking lot that I was in, for some reason, these people went and tried to do things a completely different way. And they got in a lot of trouble for that, because Echelon at that point, especially if you were a time agent, they didn't mess around with anything like that. You could have no military tribunal courts or anything. You would just be shot on sight if you did something like that. In some of these deep classified programs, unacknowledged access programs, quantum access, and unidentified quantum access programs, which was gained from research and lost files. But this parking lot that I was in, it was in front of a building that we had gone into quite a bit. We would take a drink from a pharmacy and get what we needed to be able to be active in these types of weird time missions. And I actually had to come and get retrieved and rescued from this parking lot because the sky itself would not turn to sun. And I've only seen something like this happen down when I was in a cave once, and I was stuck in amber in a cave, and I had to have people untime box me, is how I would describe it, and then unentangle me from that amber, because we've seen time do crazy things that is very hard to explain.
It's very interesting, because it said that sometimes souls that are, in the cycle of reincarnation on Earth, that don't want to come back for hundreds of years because of how unfortunate their previous life was, they just get stuck in amber, and that it has been soft disclosed in shows like Fringe. So you're one of the very few that corroborate that. But I also think that despite of living out some of your childhood in the time bubbles, you're also connected to like a galactic scale, or at least a planetary system clock that you get at birth that's tied to your DNA, right?
I would say that's correct, yes. But a lot of that is still classified, and the classifications of people that are here on Earth and visitors and whatever compartmentalization that the special access kids contained, carried, even in their blood and other things like that. So yeah, there are different types of clocks. Some of the mutant kids, that's not really the name for them, but they put them on X-Men or whatever, had the ability to tell time in their eyes. Like their eyes would mutate, look like black goo or matter would move around in their eyes, and it would form two hands of a clock sometimes, and they called that time dialing, where your eye would mutate and then slowly move around or go backwards and forwards in incremental segments. But that's a whole area of research that I can't get into. But it does come from star systems, and I think where you're getting at, and places that you traveled and where your DNA has access to and whatnot. You have a master file in your passport that can be scanned and read and tell people how many star systems you can even go to.
And this is another extremely deep rabbit hole dive, but this is probably the most organic place where I can insert it. Was you mentioned that at the end of Montauk, the time travel institute offshoots got amalgamated, and the survivors of the programs got brought on time ships.
Yeah, that's a whole different offshoot program that happened, and it happened illegally. And other people had to be rescued from that ship. It was basically a rogue ship. When the research facilities got burned down and everything got wrapped up and taken by the military, yeah, there were some people that still wanted to do certain things and their own type of time institute research. So they took a few kids and tried to do a whole little program in itself on a ship, but the ship itself had to be contained and quarantined because of all the things that happened on it, and it backfired. Because a lot of these things, people have to understand that there should be oversight with, because of the insane things that I have seen happen when people do try to go rogue. If you're working with good humans and they're on a ship, yes, it can go very good. I'm talking about good people that want to work for humanity, those type of people that you want to work with. You definitely need oversight in certain of these things. Quantum access is highly classified because of its sensitive natures, and it does protect certain people from certain things that happen to them or could happen to the earth, and to not repeat the same mistakes and have the same things happen. It's for various different reasons. So that's going to be like slower to release than just JFK files or different classified things. And I do understand some of it. So I don't see things as just black and white like that.
What about the idea of the breakaway civilization? Do you necessarily see it as like a satanic trap that you shouldn't ever promote, or say that you want to go and break away, or is it also more nuanced?
Well, the ones that we saw and documented in a type of frequency fence void space that had to collapse was a satanic secret space program all by itself. So things like that, yeah, you got to deal with and collapse. And we saw void places and break off civilizations where kids would be kidnapped on ships or even on streets and link with a consciousness or whatever was up there, and they would go up onto the ship and they would be taken to certain zones or vectors up there, not for a agrarian modern futuristic civilization seeding or anything like that. They would be taken there to be eaten and harvested. Yes, a lot of those places did exist. So I have a deep mistrust for a lot of that. But with the right group, yeah, you could make planetary expedition inhabitable, but it would have to be done the right way. Because a lot of the missions that we went on, like I mentioned before, in Mars and Venus, severely damaged a lot of people because of its uninhabitableness and the things that were up there.
So basically, a synthetic realm that is tethered to the physical.
No, your physicality can get trapped in there, because you're dealing with realm warfare and going back and forth. So you can interchange with the physical and the spiritual. Yeah, you can go up there and be trapped in a space body, but you can. I've seen people go back and forth. One of the things they did on ships was your original body would be on a ship, and then you would just go down, do a mission, and go back up. We had one of those instances where we were in Iraq, and we were in a palace that was trafficking children, and two very powerful entities were running it. So at the end of it, we were chased by Arabs with swords, but we knew and had comms to where the extraction point was, right outside. So the ship would appear, we had cloaked ships back then even, and you would go back up into the ship, but you would have a metal scanning bar that would go over your forehead. And a lot of times we didn't have time to hold the memories. So it was an ability to be able to hold those memories, because they would slip like periodic tables slipping out of your mind, because they would process you very fast. And then you would go to the next place, to the next place. So it was like an accordion that got stretched out, or a rubber band. We didn't have time with all the missions we were used for to process things properly. So then we ended up, having a grievance for that. And then we had the best therapies that they found for us before sensory processing was even a thing. And we would go on missions and have a hotel room somewhere where it would be completely decked out sensory processing, decompression room where we'd be more effective if we had that and certain types of things like that to be able to continue in the work that we did.
Mm-hmm. But do you agree that to even enter the conversation of going off-world, because they are not subject to this multiple matrices nested within each other that keep us so locked down in density, that you need to undergo this kind of artificial ascension, right? And have you ever heard or experienced something like forced ascension?
Yeah, that was put into Tron and Blade Runner, and there are files interwoven in both of those movies. Yeah, those actually came from Pluto and very bizarre places that could be used for interweaving a sci-fi story with people that were in the space program, their stuff as well. So, yeah.
Where do you stand on that, on ascension machinery?
I'm not in agreement with
Mm-hmm.
synthetic ascension, like Ascension Island and all the transhumanistic agendas and whatnot. Like the Mormons are the biggest controllers of transhumanism. They've been doing it since the 50s, and they have the biggest organization in the world for it. And they're in arms with the Scientologists at the top of the operating thetans that will put you in a consciousness transfer chair. That's all true, but it's not necessary. And I've seen the damage and the fallout from that versus just working in your organic template, in your morphogenetic template.
What about where do you stand on the notion that has been put forward by some people like Gigi Young and Ashayana, that the lower you go in dimension or density, the more in the distant past you are, and even the fallen angel, but as well as a divine angel, they are necessarily from a distant future from us, except the fallen ones are from a digressed one.
I'd say that circumvents truth.
Oh, yeah?
A lot of those teachings get interwoven with maybe 10% truth and 90% lies. So it's really hard with a lot of those teachings to go through it with a fine-toothed comb. So yeah, I used to be into a lot of those teachings, a lot of New Age, and I would say they have a lot of things that are right, but they do have a lot of things that are wrong too, and people that are more into the cookie cutter indoctrinated Christianity versus the fringe Christians who understand a lot more of the spiritual apparatuses. Some New Age people do understand more than they do, but we're all in this learning game of life together. And those teachings that you're talking about specifically, some of them are designed to become vampiric or entrapment systems themselves. And Metatronic overlays, I've fought those, and Metatronic cubes, they're not holy and they're not of God. So that's separate.
But didn't you also see the angel Metatron?
Yeah, and I was not a fan because that one is a fallen angel. People can make excuses and say any hideous or demonic being is just from another timeline or ancient past, but that's not necessarily true. They could be masquerading, but my experience of traveling back and forth through time is that it's fluid. It doesn't mean that it's a lower density and that it's more of a hellish dimension. There are certain things that can factor in techniques, because I do believe in Hasatan and Draco in the realm of things that came here from the war in heaven. I've seen them try to pull people back in time, like on a treadmill, but that's more to derail them from their destiny. And you can break those loops.
So you disagree with the idea that the aliens that are, involved with humans are trying to chaperone us into a certain direction to, enact certain agendas on their behalf because they know that we are going to eventually turn into them. So you don't agree with that?
No, I would say no. Because we each work out our salvation in fear and trembling, and certain races don't mix. Humans are designed to complete themselves in a glorified body, in an avatar body that we came here to do different tasks than other types of beings did. I guess that's the best way to put it. One last thing I will say about the war in heaven and the beings that fell. In my experience, yes, some of them were beautiful. Like Lucifer himself stood in front of Elohim as the cherub, and he revealed his wings so that people could see God. So in his close proximity, that's what caused him to fall, and the pride that came with it, and that whole rebellion. So the fallen angels themselves could have been beautiful at once. And the lies that people wrap themselves in with, in the trance that they get put into, is thinking that they're still beautiful and not using the discernment to unravel their faces. Because in the fallen angel cults that I saw, like the Yellow Rose of Texas is one, and packs, those types of hierarchies of fallen angels, they present themselves as beautiful. And they always do. Like, people worship them and think that they're beautiful, like a giant transvestite person is what they look like, with long fingernails and green blood. So you pull that veneer off, and then you see their true form, that they're actually hideous. So,
and they only stole the pretty genes from angelic races eons ago.
The DNA, the valor, stolen valor, all of it, they're in the libraries from our ancient past. Yeah.
But just to finish with the consciousness transfer, I think that you said that there are benevolent purposes as well, such as angelic walk-ins. And do you still have say when you are, or are you completely taken over in that instance?
It's not forever. It's intermin. It's temporary. It's a transient thing. But the main purpose that I saw starting at Montauk was to preserve those kids' life. And we each have angels that are in charge of us, that guard us, that are on assignment for us, working on our behalf. So the kids that had that happen first were the ones who were going through the roughest times. They were the ones who were chained in cages or a cell and had blood coming from their eyes and were not going to make it. Physically, they were shot. Spiritually, meant all of it. They were never going to make it. So that instance, when the angels came in and became walk-ins for them, their eyes would light up like light bulbs. They would be empowered to be able to do things that a kid couldn't. They could throw open the steel doors and take out all the reptilians, per se. That was for preserving a certain seed in a certain group, soul group that came here. And that was definitely benevolent work. But it didn't mean like Uriel would stay in that kid's body for the rest of their life. It was always a temporary thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen Archangel Michael broadcast through somebody's body, but it was, for specific reasons and purposes. And then he would leave. But we would recognize that in consciousness and see it. You could see something coming up off somebody's back, like a halo, not just their own crown, but a huge, tall, sometimes even 15 feet or 20 feet angelic being come out of them.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So since we started, we had to see through the cloning center stuff. So another thing that is pretty well known about them is that they stage scenarios of false rescue and night figures and things that to manipulate you into trusting or mistrusting certain people. And I think you were exposed to some of that too.
Yeah, that's just another technique that a dark faction would probably use to put a wedge between a group that was working together. And in vulnerable states when they were younger, they would probably abduct them, and then I'll put them in a certain scenario together or pit them against each other to fight or whatnot. So yeah, that's more high spiritual warfare. So some of those instances you could overcome by changing the dynamics of the game and not being predictable. Because if they're mapping your neurological system in your body, just like a wood tick does or a computer could do, then you have to become unpredictable. And that was also another advantage that we used by always reinventing ourselves. And again, that comes with changing your thought patterns first and foremost, and then what's also in your heart.
And do you remember how you became unpredictable yourself in order to take out the octopus creature?
In certain instances like that, if you're dealing with a demonic creature, you had no choice but to end its life. So That one was pretty self-explanatory. You would have to fight that. Just it's kill or be killed, and that's just the way it was. But other scenarios, yeah, definitely could be different. I don't want to get into the details of all of them.
Okay, but you continue to wake up in these facilities, sometimes a few months apart or periodically, and you were pulled back because you still had vulnerabilities at the time, and you even woke up with physical marks like bruises.
Yeah, they can loop you back in a callback type of way. You can be tripped out very fast. I would be tripped out by even looking in a mirror sometimes, or a piece of jewelry, whatever attachment it was that was used to bring me back to a place. That could be a trigger too, physically, and then you could just be there in a second. It could happen that fast. It wouldn't have to be, oh, you had this elaborate abduction or something. The dynamics of it could be very quick. So, and the time dilation though that comes with that, that's the factor that didn't make sense to a lot of people. And then the missing time, and that there's different ways you could be tripped out, and it could just be with your brain chip that had already been in you. But the point is collecting your pieces or parts wherever they are, and then not having people that you don't want to have access to them, not having access to them, and bringing them back into your body and anchoring all that back in to singularity, to self. A lot of us were stretched out in too many bodies, and we had to find work to be able to get back into even one or two bodies was doing good if you were a survivor of some of those different scenarios.
Mm-hmm. And they also manipulated you into believing that it was all an effort for genetic healing of some chromosomes and other false promises.
There was many different ways that you could be brought back, yeah, and it comes with what you agreed with, what your agreements were. If you true wholeheartedly believed that and denied your real core self and went along with that, it was much easier to manipulate you. So again, a lot of it comes from changing your behaviors. It's like, what is that therapy where it's reconditioning your behaviors so you're not doing the same pattern? Cognitive behavior therapy, maybe, or something. You can do that yourself. Once you stop that lie or whatever agreement that you had, it literally gets canceled out. And it's like breaking off a soul tie. So quantum healing can happen in a second. It doesn't have to be this really long, drawn out process of breaking one thing off or this. I mean, it can be if you allow that to, and you're resisting and you're not going to surrender yourself to healing.
And with time, you did even develop the ability to learn how to jump out of your body before the clone was killed.
Definitely. We learned that at an early age, actually, because when we were in Montauk, Hulk programming especially started out with having pools of quicksand. So you'd be on your walks in the morning, and then you'd have to jump over quicksand and not have anybody help you out of that quicksand. So we had to learn how to save ourselves, basically, and get that desire, I guess, and that willpower to make it through, to save ourselves very early. Because if you didn't, they would just let kids be killed in their original bodies left and right. And then whoever was the fittest or the leftover, then, they would just go to different areas or different branches, different arms, and continue. So yeah, we had to do that in water, not just the quicksand. The quicksand wasn't really instilled in us to get out of that situation. And then to realize, oh, I have this ability to be able to preserve myself and to keep going. And I didn't die. But then they do it in water too. I was actually put in water once near one of those quarries where they have a lot of underground workspaces and a whole underground city. One of my handlers had me throw me into the pool outside, which was just like a little pond, but it connected to the whole facility that was there in this quarry system. and there was a fish man in the water. And he did this on purpose just to be cruel. So the fish man's head came up out of the water and I was close to it, but I knew that I was trained very well because in a second I jutted very fast over to the shore onto the dirt. And I don't know how I had that ability to move so fast. Otherwise, that thing would have taken me down and God knows what. But yeah, we had those instincts to do things like that. We wanted to save our lives, of course.
Mm-hmm. But what about, where does Project Lucid fit in this whole cloning center landscape? Because from what I understood, it also taps into your REM phase of sleep, where the brain is the most active. And from what I understood, it displayed what you were dreaming on a screen, and you would all see and hear what the child that was being tested on was dreaming at the time.
Yeah, I don't know its current purpose. I know it's not as big as it was back then because that was kind of a beta program to place kids into other programs, to see how connected they could be with their brain chips together and communication wise, working as a team, being able to see maps with each other, to be able to share each other's experiences, go on psychic hunts, whatever. That was a lot for that. They're still stationed in Houston, Texas, but as to what they're currently doing with it, I can't really say. My experience with that Project Lucid was so that everything was broadcast and viewed with each other. So we had to find ways to hide ourselves and what we were doing from being actively displayed or our thoughts actively read. Because with me, they were using it for torture. And the first instance is when I was taken back to a pond after I would go on a plane somewhere. And then my handlers had a habit of drowning me. So they would drown me in the pond and then bring me back up. And they would show this to the other kids in my group. And so that's why some of our memories are mixed up too, because people think that what they viewed is their own experiences when sometimes it wasn't. We were viewing each other's. So then they think that they were somebody else, that they're not. But in my experience, they would see me being drowned and through my eyes and what I was experiencing and going through to instill fear in them to continue with the program and that arm of the program. So for me, that was more for torture. I never had anything really good come out of that, except for when we had more control over our lives later in life and would be able to communicate with each other with cleaner comms, I would say, and clearer communication methods and modalities. But at first it was used very viciously.
Just to steal energy and to anchor your consciousness into their synthetic
Yeah,
realms.
like, oh, you think your life's bad? Look at this kid's life. Sometimes, oh, here you go. And they would just, because of what we were connected to and our amalgamations, they'd be able to view it, but not just view it, but to also experience it as if it was their own. So that was an ability you had to learn first, to separate what wasn't yours and somebody else's torture per se versus your own. And it could erode empathy if it was done too much to other children. So you had to keep your humanity, because pieces of our humanity have also been broken off and fragmented. So that's why getting your humanity back and those pieces of humanity and not viewing yourself as something so much higher than a human can take you to the wrong way and actually prevent and block your healing, because we're supposed to collect those pieces of humanity back. That could be a part of your childhood that you need to get back in an instance like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where you didn't like seeing other people getting tortured, and you need to integrate that back, because it could be a part of you that's still active that thinks it's okay to view torture or that it's normal. So that definitely would have to be integrated.
Right. Would you mind going over your most memorable experience in a cloning center, which is the one that took place in a top secret building? I believe it was part of, if not Umbrella Corp, then something very close to this. And you wore fancy white outfits. And you were convinced into believing you were living a dream life. So this must have been like a recurring thing, or I don't know.
Well, yeah, the Umbrella Corps people started at Montauk, and they started with the Plum Island Dogs, and the clone house that we had lived in. And they would bring us out in different cars daily to do different tasks. Now, they did have pictures of us standing with AK-47s, machine guns, different weapons, dressed all in black. We were not allowed to look at anybody in the eyes unless you were told it was okay during that time period. And that was very intensive training. And a lot of those, it was more like assassin type programming, I would say. But there was a red queen and a white queen type program with that. But that deals with quantum computer systems, more so motherboards and things of that nature that we had dealt with. But they were also put into other buildings, yes, and cloning facilities. So then they would just, if you could shut down a motherboard at Montauk, they would put it in another building and make it a hybridized version of it or something, and see what you could do with that, like cracking a safe, a new combination or whatnot. So yeah, that was a very sinister time. Sometimes you would wake up in hallways. They could play things back in this time period when we were very much slaves, from a real childhood memory or something, in a completely black hallway, and all you'd hear is somebody speaking on a microphone on the sound system through the hallway. So you'd have to block that out, and whatever they played in your mind, that was like a torture from your childhood or something, and then get through the scenario. So that's how they started us with weird scenarios like that. I guess the one that sticks out the most is just the creature ops that weren't topside, they were underground, because they had ways to open doors, and you never knew. This is the difference. On surface, when we had more freedom, we knew exactly what we were doing. We could map out missions and objectives, directives, whatnot, and enjoyed doing certain ops like that did involve cryptozoology and creatures. But down there, everything was unknown. So that's the difference. So you could go down there, and then your best friends could be paired to fight with you or something. So those were really psychologically difficult situations. Those are what scarred people the most, I think. If it really was them, sometimes it wasn't. So you'd have to determine who was who and what was what. I guess the big creatures down there were probably the worst, which you could definitely just write off as that was a bad dream. But some of them, we knew that if we didn't go into the situation and fight not just one, but a lot of very scary hybrids or creatures, whatever they had created in their weird laboratories, then you probably wouldn't make it back if you were in a clone to your body, or if you were down there as yourself. You could actually end up dying or being resuscitated, reanimated, having a blood transfusion, different things that they did if were close to dying in your physical body. So the creatures, those were the ones that really got me, because it played out like you were in a movie, like you were in Lucid, but then you realize at last minute and figure it out what you had to do. So you had to react very quickly. Otherwise, it would be like a purgatorial type of scenario played out, where you'd have to start over and then you'd have to do it again. And you didn't want to get stuck in that, because it would take a lot longer for it to end. So you had to make hard decisions and judgments at the time and complete the obstacle course, I guess. So the creatures were the worst, I would say, the giant ones that were down there.
And is one of these creatures the mother reptilian from the Red Lotus pool? Because that was what is especially gruesome, although very interesting. In the viscous liquid with severed body parts that were floating.
I've seen that in different areas. Yeah, mother reptilians. I've seen the mother birds, the mother reptilians. Those were pretty nasty. Yes, and anybody that would partner with those definitely ended up in a hellish dimension. No, the mother reptilians were not the worst. I'm talking about like giant monster like creatures that were probably 10 times the size of that would have a door open, and you would be feeling very small and very little. and you would have to use what you had to finish that scenario.
I think over time you developed the technique to resist the gaze of these creatures, which would want to for you to make eye contact in order to give you a glimpse of the hellscapes that they come from.
Yeah, I don't know if we talked about that. In a lot of places they did that. So that was the inversionary principle of the mind virus. Like train stations, for some reason, were a spot in time travel where there was a lot of battles. And some were temples, Mayan temples. That could be a reason. But they were also places where people were chased that had handheld tech. There was a lot of old men that went through time that had pocket watches and black hats on. There was weird characters that were just MIBs in the time program. There was guys that would just go follow you in time with cameras and take pictures of you. And they would have a trench coat on and a hat and drive like a black 50s car or something. So you had all these different types of characters and things that happened in the time program that are very strange. You could have a child in 1950 in a cabin, and then those two guys in the cloaked coats could just come in and say, oh, it's time to go. And you'd have to leave your baby and go somewhere else. So there was a lot of psychological and emotional damage that came from a lot of things they did. And a lot of times with no explanation, too. And you'd have to figure it out later. To get to your question, so the train station, there was one that was really bad where there was an orphan house nearby. A lot of kids were being taken, disappeared. A lot of this happened in the mining period, too. And so it raised some red flags. And so a mission had to be done in a certain area. And what they would do is they would look at you, and if you held gaze with them too long and they were fully manifesting, then there could be just a water fountain, there could just be plants, there could be beautiful floor, beautiful scenery in this room. But what you would see in their mind would be a fountain full of blood and disgusting decay and black mold and the things that they actually manifested from the realm that they came from and what they were operating from. So it was a complete inversion of reality. It really was the upside down world. And they could hold you upside down even if they were spiritually attacking you. And you'd have to go put yourself back because you would literally see in your mind's eye upside down sometimes with them. So they had this electromagnetic ability to try to flip your mind. And then you'd have to fight that. The alpha reptilians did that a lot with people too. They would have sitting sessions with them where you would sit across in a chair with them and they would try to get into your mind and hold you in whatever space and do this weird travel with you for as long as they wanted. So whatever time dilation happened with that and what people went through, I don't know the specifics, but that was one thing that they did.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned the Alpha Draconians, and were they in charge of these depraved cloning centers where they would have just panopticons and arena-like entertainment venues? Or was it other races?
Yeah, the ones when they were manifesting did have tails, and they were black tails usually, or albino Dracos, or black ones. No, they weren't the only ones that were running the centers. There was just bad humans also running the centers. It didn't have to be draconian. I'm sure those people are possessed, but there were humans that did have cone-like heads too that were elongated. So
Maldakians, maybe.
I don't know the name for them. Could be, yeah. So they ran a lot of them too because their skulls were different shaped and longer. But most people thought they were human on the surface. And a lot of them wore hats.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them carried staffs too, like these walking staffs representing different factions. And
Right.
like a scepter of authority.
So you sometimes saw these higher-ups or programmers saw a spirit that is, alien flee their body, sometimes I recall, upon death.
Yeah, we did see that a lot. We've seen very evil bodies like that be incinerated and burned up with holy fire, and not like a scalar weapon. This was just spiritual sometimes, didn't have to always be technological. We saw supernatural things like that. But if a body, like a man, was controlling a whole facility and these kids were trying to escape it or something, and he got taken out, they managed to take him out, and sometimes that did happen and they would escape. Then whatever had the stronghold over that man's body, yeah, we would see it eject, and it would leave because it couldn't have a body or something to anchor to operate, because it couldn't go into one of us, obviously, so it had nowhere to go. And it had to literally flee. Yeah. Go back to where it came from. Yep.
Yeah. But it's also pretty well known that celebrities are often targeted in the cloning centers and threatened with clone torture and so on, usually used as sex slaves. But did you ever have any run-ins with celebrities while there?
Yeah. As a teenager, I saw the beginnings of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt and J-Lo and a couple other ones.
Lady Gaga, I think you wrote in your book. You mentioned her name.
I haven't had as close relations in person.
So the others, you actually have relations?
The other ones, yeah, I saw how they came into agreement and what they did for it, and what they did in certain hotels, and it was pretty sick. Yeah. They actually left graffiti in certain areas that have documented, and none of them have really changed since then.
So most of them just give in automatically.
Yeah, and they get promised certain things.
Benefits.
Yeah, I was actually, well, yeah, Miley Cyrus too. I was in a bathroom once, and there's a place that had certain planets on the outside of it that was a music venue, and we would go in, and Angelina Jolie tried to stab me in one of these places when I turned around. Some of them would walk through the mirrors even and go in and out. Tupac's blood is actually in one of these places, and Madonna frequented one of these places too, which was a dance club, and they had all these screens on the walls that were playing different movies from every different time period, and it was like a disco ball place too. It was very disorienting, and tons of lasers on the floor, which were also used for different things. But there was a back area where they had in a glass bar top Tupac's blood that was just a blood streak sealed in a glass case. So that, yeah, they steal people's stuff like that when you go along with certain things and people and the places that you go to and how they can take you to places. Sometimes they will put you on display or part of your DNA and keep it there. And yeah, it's strange. But the upstairs of this one place had these sound barrier type of walls that were all painted black. There was a black cube in the basement of this place too. And we had to break out of this building because it was blanketing our minds like a damper field, and they would trap people in one of these buildings, certain groups of clones, clone parties, whatever you want to call it, and do their fun. So that's all I'll say about that one.
But just finish with that. You believe that it's the same consciousnesses that are running their counterparts of the celebrities in the waking life as well. So they would even maybe remember it as dreams or just suppress it.
They could. Certain originals, like you see somebody like Will Smith or somebody like that, you think, oh, he's the original, but actually he's not, because sometimes those guys that got put in Hollywood are the clones, and the original person that they cloned is just in public living their life. So even the original Hillary Clinton was on Montauk Island, and she had brown hair, and she wore a sun hat and would garden. And there are pictures of the original Hillary that looks nothing like the one you see today, or the 20 different versions that you see today.
So I guess if you can listen to the blood, that's how you know. But a lot of theft of intellectual property vaults happens in these cloning centers, and the controllers have this obsession with recording everything that happens there, right?
Yeah, I don't think that there was anything that wasn't recorded unless the kids had an ability, which they did a lot of times, to shut down a place, to destroy things in a place and take out the beings that were masquerading as people inside of there and break out of the doors. Certain places had all the stuff destroyed in them like that. So a lot of those records got destroyed, the places that were broken out of and shut down by the kids themselves. But most of the other places that were active were big ones, I guess. I would say that nothing wasn't recorded from beginning to end because they probably have a lot of databases.
Did they use you for any movies or TV shows or games that we would recognize?
Yeah, they used my voice. They used my voice in a Tool song and different parts of my files. Probably 100 movies, but it's too long for me to say all of them.
Maybe the aforementioned OA would be the biggest correlation because it involves torture of human angelics and frustration of not being able to understand them.
OA was one. They did the near-death life experiences and the drowning and other things like that, which is true that they did to some people, yes. And angelic parts or kids that were hybridized, angelic pieces that were put into their system that operated, or the walk-in kids. Yeah, I think that's where all that came from. And then, of course, she has books at the end, which throws a curve where it's probable deniability. Like, oh, did she get these ideas from books that were written? But that's theft of intellectual property vaults, of course. And those were books written in a different time period. So that's why they put that in there, too, because she's just retelling different pieces in different time periods, not only of her life, but other people's, because she's like an archive. So she's basically a catalyst that says things and writes things and does things to try to activate others too. It's not just about her. And some of the kids operated like that as well.
Mm-hmm. But the theft of IP vaults isn't limited to the cloning centers, but also some of your UAP experiences or even personal life of children that are surveilled all the time, like you were, because I believe that Winter's Bone is directly inspired from your relationship with your father.
Yeah, and part of the Ozark series is a dynamic of certain family and certain things that did play out too. Yeah. Winter's Bone, Supernatural had a lot of truth in it too, because it shows like Crowley's fragments, time hopping, and torturing of angelic consciousness or angels that go into people's bodies, things like that. I think that's where they got a lot of their ideas too. It's from the secret access programs and what they gleaned from that. And, you know, who runs and makes these movies, I don't know, but I know Stephen King was involved in some of the cloning center stuff too. Because, I've seen him at certain places or academies, certain abandoned schools we would even go to. And he was
was he relishing, being there?
He was always creepy, always a bad character. And Dean Koontz, he put some of our stuff in horror books too. There's a few horror writers that I don't know how they got certain files, but they certainly did. I think they were involved with certain activities that went on, and maybe they bought it or got traded it or something. But a lot of our stuff got scattered into a lot of different sectors and people.
And it gets even crazier because the cloners even use some famous personalities from the past to create movie stars from babies.
Yeah, a lot of them are characters in history, for sure. A lot of them didn't necessarily have to be in the secret space program. Some of them just were created from a genetic bank, a seed bank, hundreds of them. I guess the last thing I'll say is the music video about Angry Johnny that was created from the Code Boys, which were all called John Titers. There was no John Titer. It shows one of the real ones in a base in a bedroom, smashing stuff in his bedroom at the beginning. That was actually taken from a real base underground. Sometimes we would have to make music videos of certain things to work our way up to topside and then be free of the base life. So yeah, she's talking about Angry Johnny. That was one of them.
John Titor. So you would put stock in what he said, but maybe later his message got distorted.
He has bits and pieces of different people's files, but there is no John Titor. There never was.
Right.
That was a code name.
A psyop.
That guy's an actor, bad actor, whoever he is. Yeah, intelligence doesn't work like that. Where it works differently. I'll just say that. So you can recognize a lot of these people. They put a lot of actors out. A lot of people come from the families. A lot of people are on the stage and they're controlling narratives and essentially gatekeepers of a lot of things, because the truth is usually a lot stranger than what they're saying and a lot more to it.
But another aspect in which you beautifully validate Marshall, who is probably the most famous cloning center speaker, this account, is the way that they even put you in certain bodies of actors and have you act out certain scenes, like in even back in time, like you mentioned in the fifth book, where you were put into this Jesse James movie.
Yeah, they did that for a while. I mean, that goes back to black and white film era, which was the beginning of the Clone Wars, where the actors that were put in clone bodies, the people that became actors, were forced to do that. In the silent film era, they rebelled. So, and that happened in Oklahoma. There was a lot of people in the silent film era that weren't who you think they are. I'll just say that. That's where a lot of it started before Hollywood, because before Hollywood, there was a Druidic circle that used to feed people to lions. So Greta Garbo even got fed to the lions when she was out there. That's why they're showing you pictures of like pre-Marilyn Monroe, all that. They show her like being afraid of lions and her handlers, and it was way earlier than Hollywood, the things that they did pre-Hollywood.
Right, but in this instance, I'm speaking not just about creating movie stars from dug up DNAs of celebrities, but even just using the soul transfer technology to, impose your soul over, for example, Nancy Kelly in this instance.
Yes, it was very hard to wrap our minds around from the beginning, from the movie Grapes of Wrath to certain early films like that, where you could be 8 years old and have to do a black and white film. That's what they started us out with. So it could be, it definitely wasn't our bodies, of course. I mean, we're like 8 years old. And
so just very temporary.
Yeah, we would be speaking through them. That's why they sound so dumb and so naive and so childish some of the times, because we had no idea what we were doing or saying. And the painter Hopper actually made a lot of paintings about the time agents. And ironically, Hopper, our consciousness was stripped into some of those early bodies. And that was probably the earliest time that I can remember the silent film era of doing something like that.
So it even happened with modern movies.
Yeah, it evolved later on into big film screens, and some of our voices are things that we would say or things that were recorded. They would be put into movies. Even sounds they put into movies. Like if there is a machine that was used, they'll record that sound and put it as a trigger in a movie. Like have a death trigger or something at the end of the movie. I've noticed certain sounds are definitely displaced throughout certain movies, where it brings you back to a certain memory or a certain place.
And what do you think happens to the actor's consciousness in that case? Do they know that they are being puppeteered, or are they just zonked out?
I mean, it depends on who it is, and just they're cataloged. It could be like an archive of which body is it going to be. People that have been given over and don't care, those are more the multi-use bodies. But if it's just been done to you once or twice and you're fully sold and aware and you stopped that process from happening, then that's a different scenario altogether.
And I find it pretty funny that Casbolt was in that movie that I mentioned, was Henry Fonda, but he wanted the bad boy role, so he wasn't happy.
Well, we were very young kids when they started doing that to us. So yeah, we had different reactions to different things, and we were competitive too, which was the weird thing about it too. Like, no, I don't want to be this person. You be this person, or I'm not doing this anymore. But it just continued until we learned how to stop being accessed, which took decades.
So until that point, you just role played and totally method acted yourself?
Fun with it sometimes too, yeah.
Because no one would believe you if you said otherwise, if you said the truth anyway.
Oh yeah, back then people would look at you crazy if a movie came out in the 80s or something. You're like, oh, that was me. No, most people would not have believed you.
And you even got to hang out even outside of the shooting schedule and even dance with celebrities.
Yeah, that actually started at Montauk and the mansions that were out there. And a lot of celebrities ended up frequenting a lot of those mansions, and even back to Andy Warhol and his mansion and all the things that happened there. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen U2 out at the Montauk mansions and a lot of different singers and actors.
And from what I understood from your book, it had to do with enacting again certain time currents for the whoever was in charge, the AIs of these programs, and making sure that they played out according to their plan.
Yeah, but if it was Long Island mansions, I mean, the whole area back then was on a certain program. To the towers that were out there, to everybody was, most everybody that lived there was involved or aware or okay with what was happening out there. Even if they didn't know, it was just a null, dull zone where they could just make people's minds null and dull. The cops, if you tried to escape, would come and get you and bring you back. You didn't have any real help in places like that. And it stayed that way for years. And it took military intervention and intelligence work on multiple levels to be able to break into that and to free certain groups of kids and whatnot, because it was on such a lockdown. And it was trying to run on a whole time current system and a closed loop system, I would say, by itself. Yes. So the kids that were the anomalies kept on messing with that time current until it finally got shut down.
So it took collective efforts. You would help each other out, because I believe that you also wrote that you would rescue like your good friend John, and he would rescue you in turn from certain cloning centers at times.
Yes, we would save each other's bacon a lot, because we had a lot of these areas in full remembrance and mapped out. And so when we had more authority later on, we actually went back to some of these places and broke into them. And we were allowed to do that. We were allowed to go in and burn places down and to completely shut them down so they were inoperational. So that was a satisfying thing and a justifying thing that came later in life.
And does Dulce count as one of these cloning centers? And just wanted to mention, because it's so well known. And what have you seen there? Is it as depraved as they say?
It is, and it's still active and it's still classified. But back then there was circular hallways and many layers, more than 10 for sure. And it went very far down. I remember room 19 and I believe room 7. And probably one of the worst memories I had from there was a spontaneous human combustion room. And people would go on stretchers and be taken down that hallway. There would be a viewing glass in another area where people were in wheelchairs, and they looked handicapped and almost mutated. So I don't know what happened to them, but that was like an off access area where the really bad people were. Maybe they were trying to be rehabilitated, or maybe they were just being experimented on. I don't know. But the one hallway definitely burning, and that was end of life hallway, disposal hallway. So you could hear and then you'd smell incinerations happen down there. So spontaneous human combustion and kinetic energy and pyrokinesis, a lot of that was mastered down there. And looking down into DNA cells and splitting the cores and finding the atomic energy that was necessary to do that, because there was a group of pyrokinesis kids too. And that training went topside for years in Missouri.
Well, yeah, so the one you frequented or were hijacked the most into was Prairie Surf in Oklahoma. And were you ever in the British Columbia one, the famous one where all the celebrities attend, and including the Queen?
I have encountered the Queen. I did not meet her there. I met her at Montauk Mansion. That was mainly all black and white, and the tiles on the floor were all black and white. I can't think of the name of it. I think it starts with an O. It was one of the big ones out there, because a lot of those mansions were used also for child pornography and the kids that were trafficked. And then they would have a room where all your videos were, and they would sell it to the black market and other things. There's many different reasons why people own certain mansions out there. I don't know exactly what she was doing at this mansion, but I had played some weird psychic game with her, like on a chessboard, because there's just black and white checkerboard tiles in one room that I was in, and she tried to get into my mind. And on the opposite side of the...
Was it through the chip connected to her belt or something?
Yeah, she had a hive running at that time, and she could activate certain things on her belt. Yes. But she tried to get into my mind, and I was on the opposite side of the room with the black and white tiles. And it looked like you were on an acid trip, because the floor would start moving and things would start shifting. And you didn't want to go into her mind because you do not want to be in a queen hive mother reptilian's mind. So
it's a realm of hell.
Yeah, and it could be hard to get out of. So you definitely have to fight that, and then try to get your reality to surface back to frequency vibrationally normal, where things would go back to being solid, in a solid state.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's all the time I have for today.
Yeah, that's good.
Get going.
No, but I'm really thankful, and I'm glad we could do this. So yeah, we should continue with the book series maybe at some point, and because there's all sorts of things, the cup runs over, including I wanted to go over some of the well-known like tropes, like the Anunnaki bags, what they really are, and like the Vatican, what it looks like in the catacombs. So
that's a deep dive. What happened in the Vatican? It's a whole underground world and a maze. That was actually, I would call that one of the Maze Runner files. The underground Vatican time wheel. We'll dive into that at some other point. The time program originated a lot from the Vatican and the Centurions and sending people out for 1,000 years. So that was definitely a branch. And they did take some kids from Montauk by age 11 out there who survived Plum Island, especially to work for that arm of Hydra, which would be Vatican.
Right.
So I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. Well,
Спасибо за тебе, хорошей жизни.
Cheers. And see you soon.
Bye-bye.